Game 12, in my own opinion, Game 12 is possibly the best game in the match. Best game, I would say, like perfect play. And this game is pretty much good to explain to people because people looked at this game and what's special about it. It's actually a very instructive way to learn chess, the way it was played. And we had Ding lost the game 11, and he's playing game 12. He has the white pieces, and I was predicting maybe we could see Catalan or English, so he could bounce back and see if he could win or he could draw. I mean, there's only like limited games left. He has to try. So we had Ding with white pieces, and he played c4. Very good choice. Ding is known for the English, and he's known for the Catalan. By the way, the English could transpose the Catalan depending on how your opponent plays. And I know people love to play this kind of stuff. You play the English, and they could switch to the Catalan, two different openings. So we had e6 by Gukesh. I think the last time that they had an English e5, I actually felt like e5 is probably a good choice considering the match standing. Why not e5? Maybe Gukesh didn't feel like it was maybe they had something prepared against his f6 idea. But I think e5 would have been more interesting instead of e6. So we had g3. And then we had d5, bishop g2, knight f6, knight f3, and d4. Now, I have something to explain about this structure here. I don't think this is a good choice to play against Ding in this situation like this. Ding is very strong player when it comes to shadow the bishop, whether it's in English or Catalan. He plays those positions very good. So the problem with d4, even though it's a move, it's something that you could play. It does give the bishop on g2 some kind of like it's a Catalan style, and usually Ding is very very strong at it. I could also think of like Magnus. He loves to play this kind of positions, and I think maybe instead of this move, maybe he just play something else. You could play c6 or any kind of bishop e7. You could still walk into some kind of Catalan d4, and I think this is what's Gukesh concern. Should you play d? And this is actually where you could play. Let's say play bishop e7. You could switch to Catalan, I believe here, Catalan opening, and this is something that he may feel like is not a good thing. Should we move to Catalan? Um, so he played d4 himself. That's my explanation of why he played d4. Sometimes you play a line you may not be comfortable with just to avoid your opponent playing d4 himself. So we had a castle here and knight c6. Usually you could play c5, some kind of something like here, I guess. Takes. I feel like this is good position for white. Bishop is sitting on g2. Is it reverse Benoni, perhaps? It should be still good for white in terms of like activity. But maybe this is something black could have played. Maybe something like that. Maybe from black's perspective, it's something that maybe Gukesh could have decided on. But we had knight c6, and then we had e3. I actually felt like e3 is too. I mean, bishop c5 comes to mind. Maybe a3, a5 kind of stuff could happen. There must be b4 ideas. I think Magnus played this before, if I'm not mistaken. I think around here, though, Black has to make a choice, because if you're kind of sitting back, waiting for your, White to making small improvement, then it becomes a problem. We could see what I mean by the next moves. We have bishop e7, and then we had small moves like d3, and then we had takes, and then we had bishop takes. Now, when you look at this position, it's equal. The computer is suggesting it's equal and everything. So if d3 pawn, it could be like a weakness, or it could be a good pawn for white. Should white play d4, d5 in the right moment, then his position is getting very strong. If d3 becomes like a target and black could try to say, well, I could play e5 and weaken up the pawn, then black has to prove this. So both sides have to decide to make sure, to make a claim that, oh well, that this pawn is weak. This pawn might be, effective in what in white's favor. So I mean, both sides has to prove it, and that the reason why e5 is being played. And then we had knight c3. We had castles. We had rook e1. I actually, this is how Ding plays, and I think this is like the core on was his style. In a position like this, he does perform very well. I mean, you make feel like it's equal, but I actually feel like this is like a nightmare. The reason I feel it's a nightmare, black doesn't have much plans. I mean, maybe bishop e6, queen d7, rook d8. This is the only thing that I could think of. If you sit there waiting, for white to make small adjustment, to make small improvement, black will be running out of ideas. So the next move does make sense. Maybe h6, bishop e6 is coming. E3. Now, I don't know if e5 was necessary. Honestly, the reason I don't like e5 is because of giving up knight b5. This is a big problem in the long term. I don't know if e5 is necessary. I'm starting to believe this whole line may be questionable. The reason e5 is just a big problem, knight b5 could be used by white, and you cannot do anything about it because it's just, you're stopping b4. But, maybe white is not intended to play b4 at all. He's just maybe forcing you to play e5 so you could play knight b5. I mean, you could see that white is making small gains, bishop e6, and then we have king h2. I say queen d7 is pretty much the move. Queen d7, rook here, or rather rook gets to d8. You have to improve your queen's position. It feels like the queen is sitting on d8, not doing anything. We had here, I don't understand this move, to be honest. I actually feel like this kind of position is not Gukesh kind of ideas or the way he plays. Gukesh wants to looking at deep lines, a lot of calculations, but here is not much. This is more like positional, pure positional understanding. And you may feel like white is not doing anything, king h2, and but white is making a lot of gains. I mean, first of all, e5 could become a big problem attacking wise. You could attack the pawn. Knight b5 could be used. D4 is likely to be pushed, and the bishop on g2 is looking at this diagonal. It's a small stuff, but you're looking at knight b5. You're looking at e5 being a weakness. You're looking at bishop g2 is attacking on b7. You start to get the sense that, white position is really good. It still was the right play. You could still able to defend. But rook b8 just doesn't feel like where exactly this rook b8 is going to do. I mean, you don't have b5 break, right? Is b6 his idea? This rook is not doing it. Maybe queen d7, I mean, in my own view, would be like the move. Connect the two rooks and then some kind of rook d8. It's a much better move than rook b8. So we had rook b8 anyway, and then we had queen c2. So this queen c2 is pretty strong move because now basically white is trying to support his c4 pawn, maybe some rook d1, and then some possible d4. So the queen move makes sense to connect the two rooks, and then we had rook e8. And then we had knight b5, and that's always a worry here. Then the knight jumps on b5. Maybe bishop f8. I'm not sure. Maybe bishop f8 here. I mean, it's hard to say which ideas that black has in this position. But we have bishop f5, rook here, which makes sense defending on the pawn. So I don't think black able to prove that this pawn is like weak in order to win it. I don't think that's possible. I don't understand knight here, to be honest. Maybe bishop f8 now makes sense. Making use of the rook being on e8. This is possibly the way to go. Again, it still feels like white has this activity, maybe queen c3, and then you could start slowly playing d4. This move is kind of, I'm not sure if knight c5 was his original idea, but queen d2 is pretty strong. And again, you're supporting d4. It all comes down to d4. And I think even after knight c5, you're looking at d4. Also, white at some lines would take on e5 depending on where this knight is going. It's a very strong move, and I feel like around here, black is running out of moves. What exactly are you going to do? And I think here we had bishop g6, and I'm not sure what exactly does it achieve. Black making moves, but there's not much ideas with the moves. Then we have d4 break, and now this move is extremely strong. I mean, let's say you take, for example, you could just play bishop f4. And this weaken up here, you take on d4. The bishops are getting active. Every piece is really good in terms of activity wise. Black pieces are not doing much, and c7 is weak. So what d4 is doing, I think the next move is e4, inviting e4. And you could argue, say, e4 is pretty good, but it's not. After knight here, now you improving your knight position now. This is all positional chess. This is the modern way to play chess, is to play very positional ideas, to make your pieces strong by making pawn pushes at some point and making your pieces so strong. So obviously the knight on g1, it's looking at knight e2 and knight f4. You may feel like it's very easy ideas, but it's very strong ideas. As a matter of fact, black doesn't have anything going for him in terms of like winning ideas or anything like this. So knight b6, and I think now black is trying to say, well, we're attacking on c4 is not the biggest, problem for white. Maybe queen c2. It's funny that white could waste moves and he's still pretty good. I think queen c3 is doing is d5. You want to play d5, you want to play knight e2, and d5 also would, a5 would be, at some lines he could take it. So queen c3 is a very strong move. It's hard to say like what black has here, maybe bishop f6, and then we have queen back. You could say that the queen moved 2 squares, but it's fine. You always have like knight e2, knight f4 now. In some lines you could play d5. But we had e4, and then we had knight e2, and then knight f4 is coming in. Again, e4, black doesn't have ideas, to be honest. It feels like the position is equal. Equal amount of pieces and everything, but white is controlling the game with all the pieces. The pieces are all working together, and the pawn pushes are in white's favor. And then you're looking at d5, d6 to come across. The bishops are pretty lining up like this. It has to be good for white. So we had bishop g5, and honestly, the next move is pretty strong by Ding. Very, very strong. Now you're looking at knight takes and, bishop takes, and, this may be like a triple pawn, not double pawn. It's hard to make moves, and he took here. And here's the moment. I don't think you take with a pawn. You just have to take with a bishop. You take with the bishop, you're attacking on c7. So you could say that after here, you could play e3. The bishop attacks the queen. Oh, that may be a mistake by Ding. No, you just play queen c3 here. There's a line where you could just play like rook f1. You could also take on e8. After rook f1, you look at this position. Look at the eval bar. It's going up. Excuse me. There's a reason why this is pretty good for white. Look at this. Pawn could be, you could take this pawn. There's d5. Black piece is going to go backwards. And you're likely to drop c7, and then f2 would be a pawn that you could grab next. The two bishops now, look at the two bishops, pretty strong. And we talked about this in the previous recap. if you have the two bishops, you need more diagonals. You could see the diagonal is very good all the way from here, if you want to count each one, all the way to here. And you're looking at this kind of diagonals around here. Bishops are pretty good at having more diagonals. And you could see the bishop at f4 is much more of a stronger piece because it has more diagonals. So the more diagonals the bishops have, the better, even defense-wise. Like you could go back. So you could see that this is a very strong position. So after here, I think Gukesh understand that e3 does not do anything. He just played here. And this has to be totally winning now because after queen c3 back again. So he does, e3 may be a move that he could do after defending on c7. And then queen c3 is actually looking at d5. You're also looking at d5 coming in. And so we have here, I mean, black's position is kind of tough. There's also time situation here. I think here Gukesh may have like 7 minutes. I mean, even if he has 70 minutes, this position is very tough. I think with knight b8, there's knight e7. You could win in exchange, or even better, you could play d5. I mean, maybe knight. I think in high depth, the computer may like d5, if I'm not mistaken. But you could play knight e here. Maybe knight e7 allows like a sack of an exchange, where the knight would jump back to c6 or something, in some lines. I don't think after d5, things are really looking very strong for Ding. Queen d7, d6. I actually felt around here maybe Gukesh is like about to resign soon. I was watching live. I mean, you cannot expect any. The knight is coming around here, and it's very difficult. c5, and then knight comes at c7. Rook is being passive on f8. You have already a pass pawn. So the pawn was on d3. Now it's on d6, and it's a pass pawn. Protected pass pawn now. It's like protecting by the bishop, the rook. The knight is very good. Just completely winning. So yeah, when you play rook over, he just take on e4. Very nice. Knight c6, and I think he just went back. You take a pawn and leave. It's exactly how I do sometimes. I play O2B tournaments, and I just, sometimes when I play stronger players or any players in general, I, take a pawn and leave. So this idea works, and then rook here, and it doesn't matter what he does. We have knight d5. Very strong move, knight e7. I mean, this is totally losing now. I mean, here resignation makes a little bit more sense, but, you can play for a couple of moves. But after takes here, you don't take with the bishop. You could also take with the bishop. I don't think it's like a big problem. But I think it's much more stronger with to take with the... I mean, if we look over the eval bar, I mean, it's still winning for white. Huh? Still winning for white, but the stronger move by far is taking with a pawn. And I need to explain why taking with the pawn makes sense. People would say you just doubling your pawn voluntarily. There's a reason why taking with the pawn is much more stronger, because you're looking at queen takes c5. You're just going to take another pawn on c5 and also landing the rook on e7. b7 is going to be problematic. The bishops are still active. So this is actually what happens. Look at this, knight b8 and then queen takes c5. A lot of things here. Is completely winning. Rook here, and then we have queen d4 centralizing the pieces. Knight a6, rook e7, queen b5, d7. What happens when you have passed pawns? You start pushing the passed pawns, and then we have here, and then I actually feel like around here, if I'm not mistaken, Ding played actually queen e3. Could you pause the video? People tuning in, could you pause video and find a better move instead of queen e3? I mean, there are ways you could win. Typically, I tell people, if you have a winning position and you don't find the top move, that's fine. But sometimes you do have to find the best move in chess, like the only move in the position that asking you to do, and you have to find it. If you don't find it, you may not have an advantage. So here, if you pause the video and found a good way to win, good. If you don't find it, tactics. You have to do a lot of tactics. However, in this position, queen e3 is just winning. I don't, this is pawn here. It's 2 pawns, completely winning. I think Ding missed queen takes c4, I think. Something like around here, and then rook over here. The problem here, though, it's, you know, the queen, you probably queen on d8. Something like here, and then this possible queen. I felt this is a little bit funny. I mean, that's the reason why I said Gukesh should have just basically resigned. There's not much here in this position. So queen e3, which it's okay to go back. He's just having, you can still have, rook e8 coming in some lines. So we have rook c2 and then bishop d6, which is pretty good. Rook e8 is now the idea. Actually, not rook e8 after bishop d6 makes sense because the rook would be under attack. So we had f6, and now we have, this doesn't do anything because of the next move. Rook takes g7. Resignation here because simply if you take here and then we queen. And it doesn't matter what you do because simply we're just gonna promote anyway, whether you move the king or no. So obviously this is like, I don't know why Gukesh was playing this on. There's no reason. This is, anybody could win this position. However, I felt like this position is, this game, not this position, but this game as a whole, very instructive game when it comes to positional chess. You feel like, where did Gukesh went wrong? I personally had this kind of experience myself when I was, trying to be a master. I was 2000, and I was like, how? I would be playing Gukesh in this game, playing the black side, and I would be losing. And I was like, how did I lose? I didn't even lose a pawn, and I end up losing in a similar fashion to Gukesh. And I'm just starting to figure out that this all comes down to like positional ideas that make my position weakening. So this very instructive game when it comes to like, if your tactics are pretty good and you're trying to improve your positional chess, this is one game to study. It's not so much the opening, it's actually the ideas that happens behind it. And how d3, the d4 break was pretty good, and how the two bishops working together. But this is how Ding normally plays with the two bishops, when you have like a Catalan kind of style, or the English, and he becomes really like a beast. It's a perfect game played by him. The reason I think it's a good game, best game so far, because it's well played. I don't think there's a mistake by Ding in this game. And not so much a mistake by Gukesh. It's just like sometimes a decision. Should you play, bishop c5 at the opening? Should you avoid d4 as a whole? Let him play the Catalan. Ding play the Catalan. So I feel like it's a very good game, regardless of the result. Positionally was pretty strong. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one, and stay tuned for more game reviews. Take care.